Hey, says we're live. So, hello and welcome everyone. We're doing an interview with Frances about her keynote in a few weeks at Meeting C++ in Berlin. She has been busy the recent years on the topic of learning C++ and is writing her second book about that right now. So that is kind of in the direction where we'll be going with the interview and probably with the keynote. Let's start with an introduction, Francis. What do you do with C++?
At the moment, whatever I like was for the last couple of years, I've had my head down, as you said, writing the books. Previously, I've worked in finance in London using C++, but I started at a small company up in Leeds doing some embedded work on some handheld barcode scanners and similar. So we had hardware engineers there, and we had started, that was my first programming job, had started using C, and we decided to explore using C++ for the barcode scanners and other embedded devices. I actually ended up learning C++ by being asked to write a parser for, it was more C with classes than full on C++, to build a little emulator so we could try and run things on the PC instead. That is a slightly over the top way of learning C++. There are simpler ways of doing it. And with hindsight, we could have just used the source code and written some unit tests, but this was 30 years ago when people did strange things then.
I actually know that also. I've once had a very obscure hardware where I developed the UI for, and which had kind of like a server interface which you connected to. So I wrote a test server which basically tried to behave or misbehave as actual hardware. So I've
Yes,
been there.
yes.
Um, so what can you tell us about your keynote?
I'm I'm taking a much broader view than just specifically about learning C++. Though we'll nudge into some C++ specifics in the middle. I'm going to talk about how people learn and some difficulties people might have and some hang-ups you might be left with from things you've struggled with at school or previously. I want to try and encourage people that if you've had a bad experience with something before, you might find you can do it now with a different teacher. I'm going to talk about teaching and training as well. I think a lot of people working in programming end up finding they have to mentor juniors or being asked to do an in-house training course for their team. And most people have never been taught how to learn, and almost no one has been taught how to teach. My first ever job was as a secondary school maths teacher. So I've done a teacher training course. I know a little bit about teaching things. So I can share some pro tips on that. And also want to take a moment to, and anyone who's listening now, say how important conferences are. And thank you, Jens, for all the time and effort you put into making this happen, because they're one of the cheapest and most effective ways of getting any training. And I think it'd be nice to encourage people to go along to some of the workshops as well and discuss that kind of thing, like where we can learn C++ or anything to do with tech. And because I've introduced the word learning, I feel there's a need to talk about machine learning and AI. So it might go a bit philosophical towards the end about intelligence and whether machines can actually learn. I might have some opinions on LLMs. I haven't quite fully formed my opinions yet, but yes, are they any good at generating training courses? Can you learn by just copying code from ChatGPT or indeed Stack Overflow or a random website? So there's quite broad brushstrokes there. Well, I'll give you some pro tips on learning, teaching, and then we'll have a muse on LLMs and AI, similar.
Yes, that sounds interesting. And I've been wondering, with AI being extremely popular, and you're actually keynoting about AI before it was cool
Yeah.
in 2019. So maybe you should mention that. Uh, you've been there and already done your keynote on AI. So if you want to see the keynote on AI from Francis, you have to go back in time or on YouTube. And I think that especially with learning, but generally with generative AI, that's really a topic which is hot on the things which are right now matters. So how do you self-learn C++ today?
I think we live in interesting times. There are lots of books out there. Several of them are terrible. Some of them were absolutely brilliant, but the language moves on. So some of the books aren't up to date, but they still contain some useful advice. So you mentioned I'm writing a book at the moment for O'Reilly, which is aimed as an introductory C++ book. And I dusted off my copy of Koenig and Moo's accelerated C++, which must be nudging 30 years old by now. There's still some beautifully put examples in there that lead people through, but it doesn't cover some more modern things like move semantics and similar. So you could get something from that, but you'll be missing out. There's some online resources. I mean, if you ever stick your nose in Reddit, everybody says go to Learn CPP website, and it is a good website, but it tries to cover everything. So you need to know what to look up. And where do you start? And I think if you can build yourself, and this applies to any language, if you can build yourself a small program that does something, even if it's a small little game, like higher lower card game or something like that, you'll end up covering so many different things you'll learn. And then there are loads of books out there that are more reference books. So they've got snippets about widgets and things which have no context to them. So they'll tell you the technical parts, but you need a leap of imagination to actually find a way to use it. So I think you need to pick your way through the resources that are there. And like I said, conferences and just listening to other people and talking with other people, joining meetups, listening to podcasts really help as well. You can get some input if you go to some of the Gen AI stuff. But I think you always need another person to talk to and someone else to look over your code and discuss things with you. So there are resources out there, but C++ has been around for so long. There are lots of resources. Some of them are out of date, and a surprising number of them are wrong, which is why a Meeting CPP website having the book of the week is calling out some good books, and that's a useful thing to keep an eye on as well. Anyone who is spending time saying this book is good, read this one, listen to them. That's important.
Yeah, I think I should add a few more books which I've actually reviewed here this summer, and I think your old book is with Manning, and they're actually also advertising for the conference now. So
Yes.
yeah, definitely. I think books are something which, especially I saw this year as a good source again, but they of course have the problem that then they age, and the other problem I think we have so much is just a few weeks or like a few days probably ago, like shortly after my holiday, I kind of got the feeling that we are basically in a new era where we were around C++11, just that the standardization is like still moving forward, but basically a lot of people are, or a lot of industries are not moving forward. We're stuck with C++17
Yeah.
and some picked features of 20 and 23, but I do wonder how will we go towards adopting things like contracts and reflection.
Yeah, I suspect that's going to be a long way off. I can remember things being stuck on C++ 98 and trying to make that move to C++ 11. And some of the organizations I worked for, this took 2 years to manage to upgrade compilers, but that's what happens when you're in big organizations with vast code bases. Things will change and we'll get there, but slowly.
So you already mentioned your new book, and of course, I'm curious about what your 15 chapters are about. So you say it's about the beginning with C++. So you naturally try to start by zero, or are you trying to teach the whole language in one book?
I'm not teaching the whole language. There's loads of it I don't understand myself, for starters, and you wouldn't be able to pick a book up that covered everything. I've aimed it at beginners in C++. I think to an extent I've assumed maybe you've done another language before. I haven't completely broken it down into precisely all the details of loops and all the rest, though I do cover range-based for loops and old school for loops and while loops and basic things like that. So start with a hello world program, because that's where we usually start. But I show using standard cout as well as the newer print line, just to say there is more than one way of doing things in C++. And obviously that using a standard print ln is a nicer thing to do, but that's not supported by all tool chains. And the second chapter, we get some input. And of course, that's getting things from C in is more similar to using standard cout. So input to output, then input. Then I look at handling errors. So I cover exceptions and standard expected as well. Again, covering two things in one chapter. But there's more than one way to do things in C++. Through the course of the book, I gradually build up a tiny little pretend trading game where your computer will generate some prices for a stock or something, and you either choose to buy it or sell if you've got some, and see if you can make a profit or not. That's it, really. But that means we look at random numbers as well to generate prices, or getting prices from a file. And then you can see how files are a type of stream. So we just gradually add in parts like this. And then towards the end of the book, I've got some random events happening, like a little message saying you've won a prize or something, or you're getting fined. So I can look at standard variant. I look at different ways to generate prices. So we end up with 3 chapters going through how to build classes to use for OOP. So then I need to get into smart pointers, and I cover move semantics and how to disable copies of objects and that kind of thing. So some OOP, some variants, some inputs and outputs files, random numbers, and there's quite a few other things in there, but just those 5 or 6 things are enough to gradually fill in quite a few pages, running on about 325 pages. So hopefully it's not going to expand too much as I go through tinkering, trying to make it clearer. I wrote a blog post a while ago, sharing, just listing the contents of it.
Mhm.
I could try and dig that out. I don't know the best place to put it. Possibly if I dump it in the chat, we can share it with people afterwards.
Okay. It sounds quite intriguing, and it seems to that the whole book has like a common theme to follow along.
Yeah, I really wanted to not have lots of code snippets that said you print to the screen like this, you read a file like that. I wanted you to gradually build on something. So you go, actually, last time we only input one option to buy or sell. Let's do this in a loop so you can do it several times and track things, and then get some stats about how often the events happen. So I think actually having a program you can play with is more engaging, and you start thinking, well, hang on, how do I do this, or what about that? I can't cover everything, but hopefully that leaves people with something to play with afterwards. And the previous book, I didn't have one theme all the way through it, but that had an introductory chapter. Then the other chapters each built up a little game that you could play with afterwards. Because playing games is a good way to learn things, I think.
And may I ask, like, what's the difference to your old book, C++ by example?
So that one, I wanted to call the last book Relearn C++ by example, but the publishers didn't like that in the title. They felt it wasn't compelling enough. So the old book assumed you had done C++ at some point and maybe hadn't touched it since C++ 11, or had only started to look at C++ 11. So I showed you newer ways of doing things and did occasionally mention what an older way might have been and why this was better. So the new one with O'Reilly that's due for publication in March next year is aimed at people who don't know C++. And the Learn C++ by example is more relearn C++, if that makes sense.
Okay. Seems we have a question from the audience.
Uh-huh.
And I think this is an interesting topic. Is there a book suggestion to migrate from C to C++?
I can't think of one that's angled at that specifically, but that might be a lack of knowledge on my part. A lot of C++ books out there start by teaching you C in order to teach you C++, which isn't a good thing if you already know C. Yeah, there's probably a gap in the market there, unless Jens knows one, but I don't.
I think the books by Slobodan Dimitrovic would be something to look for here, because he also has written an introductory C book, so you could get the C book and the C++ book and compare them if you're new. If you're looking like really to transition, we had last year a course from Slobodan on the exact same topic. And I had a lot of thinking about that course and what market would we be targeting for that. And I think the answer why such a book does not exist is that you're basically only targeting the people which are transitioning right now. And that, I think, is a subset of the C and C++ community, which is very small. And I would not know that the publisher would be willing to take that risk, in my opinion. So from my market research from last year, it shows kind of that this transition topic is a popular one where people give talks about. I think definitely also blogs, etc., on the internet, but the book so far is also not to me really. And from what we saw with the course, there was not a lot of interest in that, because I kind of realized that we are just the amount of people which need this course right now is always very small. So offering that course always will be a high risk, and so it's not really worth it for the trainers to do it. And then when a course doesn't exist, often, let's face it, lots of books exist because courses exist that they have created the material for. So and yeah, here Farid has a comment on, yes, I think I like that the new C++ books are not like those 1,000 pages books which we used to have in the past often. And if we wanted to recreate those books with today's standards, they'd be 2,000 pages.
At least. Yeah, it's really hard to read a 1,000-page technical book. I have done it several times because I get determined. But I think if you've got a book that's hit that length, there's no way the authors managed to go through it and review it and hold it all in their head, and it then turns into a reference book. And reference books are great and useful, but it's nice to be able to just take a book and sit somewhere for just a week or something and absorb yourself in that, and know that you will manage to actually end up finishing the whole book, or just a chapter a weekend, and know you'll be done in a couple of months or so. You're not embarking on a 12-month project.
Yeah, I actually have such a book here, but like if I pull it out my bookcase, so I'm afraid so it's like such a um, and somewhere back in the corner I have the Prozais, which was 1,000 pages Bible about MFC programming.
Right, yeah. I remember some of the old Rocks Press ones being like that
Yes,
fat. I can see my 3 and a bit volumes of Knuth from here that are taking up like that much space on the bookcase. So, but like I said, reference books are a different thing to something that's been designed for you to actually read the whole thing.
I think so. And definitely getting reference books is nice, but they're a
Yeah,
lot of work. And then I think the trend to having like release authors more books more often that you can pick which versions and stuff you want to have is a good trend.
yeah. It depends what you're aiming for. Some of Nico's books about standard library, for example, are quite big, but they're beautiful reference books, and I wouldn't be without them. But I didn't sit down and read them all in one go. I've read the bits as I've needed. Was there other books like Herb's books and Scott Mayer's books that you definitely do sit down and try and just read through the whole thing because they're only 200-300 pages. That is
Yeah.
plausible.
But I remember Scott retiring 10 years ago
Yeah,
because he said, I've been talking with him like in Berlin about that when he was at the conference. And he said, well, it's for me kind of impossible to be the Scott Myers for the new standards because we do not have the experience with the new standard yet, and people expect so much from myself, and I
yeah,
don't get the from other people either. So it's really difficult to do any books right now.
yes,
Um,
yeah,
and I think if like from today's perspective, probably the successor of Scott Myers could be seen as Jason Turner, who has made his work more accessible through YouTube
yeah,
and has released some books, but it's a bit of a different uh, how to say that, a bit of a different approach. Um, Anyways, so what? Back to your keynote. What will folks take away from your keynote? What do you want to?
Obviously, it's still 4 weeks away, so I reserve the right to change emphasis slightly as we go. But I wanted to encourage people. I wanted, if someone's found something difficult in the past and developed a mental block, like I said, I was a maths teacher to begin with, and I encounter a lot of people who go, I can't do that. It's all just squiggles or punctuation. I want to encourage people that if you think you can't learn something, you're wrong. With the right teacher, you might be able to get there. You might not get to be brilliant at it. I'm no good at UI work, but I can manage to make it work. I always go, oh no, all right, fine, I can do this. So you can do things. Get over this. Let go of some of your pain and previous mental scars. I'm going to spend a little time about talking about reading books. You just said about Jason Turner's YouTubes.
Mhm.
I think a lot of people say, "Oh no, I don't read books. I just look on the internet and I watch YouTubes or listen to podcasts." I want to remind people how to read a book because some people have forgotten. Some people have never even tried. A lot of people who go into programming are doing that because they didn't get on very well with subjects that involve lots of reading at school. And the thought of reading a book will horrify them. So I want to talk about how it is possible to read a book, even if you struggle. For example, you might have dyslexia. I'm starting to think I've got dyslexia, and I've done some online assessments, and they all said, yep. So the fact I've actually managed to write something that people can comprehend is quite a miracle. You can overcome some of these difficulties. And then I want to give people some tips about how to teach. because, like I said, sometimes you get landed with this and you might not know how to approach it. And the simplest thing to do is to send people to conferences, right? Then you don't have to do it. So do that. But there might be some little tips I can give you about running an in-house training course or just a lunchtime session that might make you a better teacher.
I mean, of course, it's important to know your audience. So, of course, you'll be addressing the audience which is at the conference online in Berlin and later on YouTube, I think. But then, of course, yes, books are still a very much great medium if you prefer them in digital form or just in paperback form, where you can actually write into your book and take notes. And I do think that all those media still have a lot of things to take, and especially like my generation who has grown up with that probably is like really much favoring books and paper.
Yeah, and everyone learns in different ways, but yeah, that in terms of the main takeaway, it's try different ways of doing things and don't be afraid. Let's deal with the angst and let's have some fun. I plumped for a title along the lines of stupid questions to try and encourage you to go, no, hang on, why? What happens if I do this and not receive the accepted wisdom? Just get your brain going and explore and experiment, and that's a good way of learning.
So, what have you learned yourself while working on your keynote?
That I've forgotten lots of things that I used to know that I can't spell, but as discussed, possibly dyslexic, and that I want to think a bit more about the AI side of things and how relevant that is, but I don't know whether I'll come to any conclusions by then. And that trying to teach C++ from nothing is really hard, but I already knew that anyway. I've been a few times in previous jobs where I've had to train somebody who'd come to the team having done a bit of JavaScript or something, and the jump from doing some JavaScript or some Python to trying to do some C++ was quite a big jump. So yeah.
Yeah, I've recently been doing some JavaScript and actually got some help from Hana Duzikova, which is doing fantastic things with JavaScript. And she suggested adding like some functionality to the new on-site survey for attendees. And I was like, sounds good, but how the hell should that work with
Right.
JavaScript? It was interesting to learn, and might get some other places on the website where I use this at some point when I have the time. And you've mentioned AI, and so I think that we probably should talk about that. Like, what is your view and experience with AI tooling?
I've just been watching with mixed feelings from the sidelines. I've used some of the online chat things. I've resisted setting up something in an IDE, though I've sat with people who've been using Copilot and similar. I'm like, not quite sure, but I seem to be going through a patch at the moment where I've stopped using an IDE for most of the current book and just been using Vim and the command line to build things, because I'm finding all the, even just the IntelliSense and the other things, is stopping me thinking as clearly as something. But because I'm trying to aim at people who are beginning from scratch, I wanted to go from scratch there. So I've not directly used Copilot and the like, though I've paired with people with it installed on their machines. I see a lot of people saying, "Oh, it's so much easier to generate boilerplate," for example. And
Hmm?
yeah, okay. I would really like to see us working on tooling that generates the boilerplate for us correctly, rather than hallucinating a few bits that don't quite work that you then need to nudge. So I think that there's a gap there where we could be making some of that, for example, the IntelliSense tools better. I remember years ago, lots of things coming with wizards. You could click a button and it would generate code for you to do things. And that code was correct. You might have to then go through and change some variable names. But several times, Copilot and the like comes out with things that aren't 100% correct that you end up having to tinker with and get working. That's okay. It's a good starting point. But like I said, there's better ways of doing this, in my opinion. And we could start discussing the energy costs and the impact it's having on the planet as well. Lower energy costs if it just came out correct first time. So I've got opinions on that.
I do have a lot of opinions, but I think it's like in the recent weeks it has become clear that the whole AI thing is also like a huge bubble, and that we probably don't have to be worried as much about the consumption of power and water as those forecasts which we've seen might not play out as much, because the economic value of and the actual cost of running these queries is something which I think will be really interesting when it plays out. And I kind of like that at least some of the companies, like the big companies, are now trying to go towards an interactive experience on the web, where like OpenAI showed now how to integrate apps or websites or services into OpenAI, and you can book a hotel room with ChatGPT, which of course, and their advertising always works, but it will be a fun experience for you if you end up in the wrong city, like you booked a very cheap room in London and you find out it's London in Nebraska and stuff like that. So it will be a good time to see this, and I'm a bit on the same page as you. It's not part of my world, and I haven't made an effort to integrate it into my world. And I lack the time to really do deep research on it.
Yeah, you did share. Had you done a vibe coding session? I remember you sharing.
Yeah,
something.
I had some downtime, and I actually looked at. I had a problem which was easy enough for an AI agent to find like an interface which is acceptable, but which is also tricky enough to not like just be easily solvable, like adding two numbers, which I guess also can trip them. But I used to basically the question was I need a function which returns the week number from a date.
Right.
And that is in lots of cases easy, but then you have the corner cases and you have the leap years and all those things. And interestingly, I think one of the things which I've seen is that AI is always trying to help you, and all those tools are not able to say that they don't know something.
Yeah.
So there's no way in knowing like what is fact-based and what is made up. And I remember Grok like generating tests and then telling me that the tests passed and that this new version would be 100% correct. And when you compile the code from Grok itself, you could see that the tests it wrote didn't pass at all.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. A lot of these aren't actually running the build.
Yes.
So
yes, that's the
when
other thing.
When I keynoted before in 2019, I'd used a different kind of AI to generate FizzBuzz, but that was premised on I gave the tests to the AI algorithm, and it only reported back when it had got the test passing. So there are other ways of doing this. Is all I'm saying. And you just said when you wanted to get some JavaScript working, you talked to Hannah. So sometimes talking to each other is much better than using AI. That's not to say that the Gen AI is bad. It's been designed to, well, it was around the premise of generating things and processing natural language, and it does that quite well. But turning it to generate codes doesn't 100% work, is my headline opinion at the moment. In the next 4 weeks, I might nuance and change my viewpoint.
Yeah, I'm aware that there's better ways to do this, and I actually back then tested this with Claude with the help of Matt Goodwood. And Claude actually was the only one to correctly solve the problem and
Right.
give code which actually works. And on the first try, it got a solution which is correct and uses the standard function to just get, I think it was W and scanf or something. You get the weak number, and then simply you cast it to an int and you're done. But when you then asked it if it's correct, if its solution is correct, it got insecure. And it agreed with you that its solution, of course, was not correct. And then using a C++11 function, which in that case is true, that the C++11 function would not be working on all systems. And then impressively, it generated a solution that looks like the other solutions from the other AIs, but that does the correct thing, that actually calculates this and passes my tests, which, that's like, I think, like something really important, that when you integrate AI code, that you have your own tests to prove that it's doing what it's telling you. And then I've copied those correct solutions into QuickBench. And QuickBench then showed me that the solution calling scanf and the like was 100 times faster than the second solution it gave me, which was more correct in its view. And the solution is that with all those corner cases, you need to test for every single corner case, mostly. And you call a lot of time functions, which are basically getting the current date time or something from a machine is just sometimes expensive, especially if you do it again and again and again.
Yeah.
And so calling an optimized standard function, which basically seems to solve this a lot faster than that manual solution, which is also correct, but then a lot slower. So I found that quite interesting.
Yeah, interesting.
Anyways, if you have more questions, then ask them in the chat, because we have, I think, an interesting interview here. And I'm really looking forward to the conference and toward your keynote. And I really like that we have this time again a keynote speaker, which is has been you have been a regular speaker at the conference in the recent years, hanging out with us and chilling there. So that's your audience very well.
Yeah, it's a great conference. It's been fun going along. There's a nice mixture of people, from people who are quite inexperienced in C++ to people who know almost all of it and manage to learn from each other. That's nice. Hey, Jens, you talked about LLMs not owning up to not knowing something. Do LLMs know anything? There's a question.
I don't know if they know. I think that at the current stage, they are not self-aware, and so they have a large body of data. I wouldn't call it knowledge, but they are then mathematically figuring out what you'd like to see. And at least that's my understanding of the technology.
Yeah, it's doing a probabilistic thing on what's going to come next. I don't
And
think
that's
they know anything really. But how do
why
you know when you know something?
oh well, I've read it up somewhere. I have my sources. I have my experience.
Right,
Um, and then often I figure out things that like I made a little bit of an error with the current on-site voting actually, because I figured out basically that I updated the code today to make sure that when I add new talks to the new track, that this gets ignored because I should have based the system on the IDs in the database and not on IDs in an array, which is something I sometimes like to do, and that's very good and very fast to do on a website when your data set is stable.
right, yeah,
But when your
yeah,
data set grows and when you add an existing talk to the set of talks, and I've gave it an ordering, which is basically the database IDs, and then the talk is like in the middle of the accepted talks, of course. So I figured out to the new talks, I don't need the data so much on it, anyways. And otherwise, it's as you say, like reading up, doing research, talking to people. Um, I've talked to some people about this on-site voting, for example. Hannah was one of them, and that's how she, was like, actually, yeah, why not add a search box? And I was like, let's see how this behaves, and especially how this behaves on the website if it doesn't change the state of things on the website, etc. I was worried about that.
right,
There's a list of checkboxes, and then HTML has this very nice element where you can expand things and collapse things again. So I can basically put the description of the talk in that element, and you can then, without leaving the page and without doing anything on the page, just expand that and read the description of the talk if you want to do
nice,
that. And I was worried then when you search this body of text and only the checkboxes and all the UI elements, which are, if you search for constant expressions, you only see the talks which mention constant expressions.
cool,
And I was worried that basically what happens to the other checkboxes, right?
right,
If you check the checkbox that is not constant expression, and then you're trying to like what happens to that when you do the search, etc. And like that's all fine. I learned, but generally, yeah, it's been a great learning, and I wonder where else I can potentially use JavaScript. And there's actually a great audience question from Hendrik Fuß, and he asks, I'm wondering, is there demand for C++ teachers? What is the job market like?
I've personally had my head down writing books, so I haven't been in the real world apart from occasional conferences for a while. I know that obviously there are going to be a few people who do training at Meeting CPP, so we should talk to them. I am concerned that a lot of companies are cutting budgets for training and conferences and trying to rely on LLMs and the like to generate code or get people to give in-house training sessions. And as I said earlier, I'm worried that a lot of people doing that haven't had any teaching about how to teach. So I think we're in strange times at the moment. I've not tried to get a job as a C++ trainer. I think most people who do that work as independent consultants rather than, you'd have to ask them how their cash flows are going. I think a lot of people are struggling at the moment.
think it depends a lot on what your name is. If you're well known in the industry, you still have a lot of work. And then I've recently had a former speaker reach out to me that they're now also a trainer and consultant, and I really want to talk to them like in a few months to just get to know how they are experiencing the market right now. And what I see right now is, like, let's start with the job market. I've started a jobs newsletter half a year ago, and that lets me see a lot of companies which are actually having open positions. So there is an existing job market. But also I see that every post on LinkedIn about any job gets swarmed by candidates, and that getting candidates for C++ is not a problem anymore. And that used to be very much different. So for a lot of companies that, came to conferences as sponsors or attendees to hire or to promote like this in their own teams, not only the learning aspect, but also giving them the perk to going to a conference, that has been not as popular this in the last years, and this year especially. And I think that when we go over to conferences, it's not a particularly good year for every conference I've hearing so far. And I've seen in my own numbers that we're kind of around where we were last year. But it's always difficult to say, like, October can be a very good month, and usually is a very good month for sales. So we still have space, and we're actually the only conference still which is both online and on-site. But on the other hand, that's actually where maybe you can also chip in a bit, is I've heard that ACCU moved from Bristol to the ocean, to CPP on Sea.
So, as I understand it, that CPP on Sea and the ACCU are going to join up next year and run at the same time. Maybe there'll be a ACCU track and the CPP on Sea track. Haven't seen the details yet. Partly, I think, I could be wrong, that's because the hotel in Bristol has just become prohibitively expensive. Bristol has ended up being more expensive than London for many things in the UK. Who knows why? And yeah, it'll be easier and cheaper to just run the two at the same time.
Yeah, I clearly see that. And it's also like, basically Meeting C++ is now the last big city conference left that hosts in the center of a city. And every other conference has moved out to outskirts or even further out. So I wonder if Meeting C++ should do the same and just go for some other venue or stick around. And I generally hope that things are getting better next year again. And I think what especially this year is a big influence is the tariffs and the whole influence this has on companies and investments being delayed and budgets being cut. And again, I see that compared to last year, the hybrid tickets for Meeting C++, the online tickets, are very popular.
Right.
So, I've not heard much about from the German car companies, because they are also in big trouble because, just how things have evolved in Germany. And I've had one of them order tickets, and they ordered 6 on-site tickets and more than 20 online tickets. Right. So I appreciate them making the decision to invest in a lot of people getting the training. But then there used to be a counterpart which also was sending a lot of people to the conference from a different German car company, and I've heard not a single sense, nothing from them. They're completely open. And it's just I think this is a very hard year for everyone. And also, I mean, I'm hearing it also from trainers that basically, they're seeing that it's like less in demand. And that is also maybe because of AI, because of people thinking right now that, why do they need a trainer when the AI agent can answer that too? And the AI agent writes so good code. And, as I said, these AIs are trained to generate text you'd like to see. And they actually go very much into a human weakness with that, right? That they give you what kind of you probably expected. And these systems have been every year getting better at that. And so it's interesting times that we live in. And on the other hand, with learning C++, I've also started a newsletter this year, which is focusing on the topic, which sometimes focuses my blog entries. And maybe we get a newsletter from Frances, we'll see, about her new book and other options, So if you have any more questions, maybe Francis has a question, but if you have any more questions, put them in the chat. And generally, I want to say thank you, Francis, for your time, also for agreeing to give a keynote again. And I know it's a lot of work.
Pleasure.
And,
yeah. No, it's made me think about interesting things, and I think, as ever, I'll end up asking some questions I don't answer, but I'll give people some clues. So we'll see what I end up saying in 4 weeks.
I don't want to spoil people, but it's something I liked about your keynote last time, that you asked questions and you answered some questions, but you also basically asked the audience and you didn't answer the questions. And I like that.
Right.
That's a very different style than what we had before. And I'm looking forward to seeing what we are able to pick out of your keynote and questions and what we learn from it. So
Cool.
Thank you for your time.
That's fine. Thank you.